Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We don't have the sun, just a little rain, but we made it. Thank you for coming out. Well, we want to welcome you on behalf of the City of Lake Worth Beach City Commissioners and the Mayor. I'm Carmen Davis, City Manager, and so I want to welcome you here to our public meeting. We will be talking about redistricting. You'll hear a presentation from our consultant, James Gammack-Clark from FAU. He will provide an overview of what redistricting is, the purpose of it, and the process that we must go through to do this. I know this is probably the first time that you've pursued this venture in redistricting, so we're in it together, and you'll find out that this is necessary in order to make our process in voting and your representation fair. So I will turn it over to James.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor indeed. My name is James Gammack-Clark. I'm with Florida Atlantic University, specifically the Geosciences Department. We good in the back? So our goal here this evening is to present the redistricting process that we've been asked to engage on your behalf by the city of Lake Worth. Lake Worth Beach, excuse me. One demerit already. So our agenda this evening, I'll try to keep it relatively short. I'll go and introduce the redistricting team. We'll talk about why it's necessary to engage in the redistricting process. We will discuss an analysis of your present population as it pertains to both the 2020 census and a population projection that we've performed on your behalf. We'll then talk about the redistricting criteria that we use in our methodology, and then we'll talk about the map alternatives that we've created up until this point. So at the moment we have 4 alternatives, but based upon feedback that we get from both you, the public, and from the Commission, the option to create an additional or potentially additional alternatives is certainly on the table. At the end of the presentation, of course, we'll summarize the 4 alternatives that we prepared up until this point. So, again, my name is James Gammack-Clark. I am with the Department of Geosciences. Also on our team is Dr. Ron Schultz with the Department of Geosciences as well. We also have Dr. Bourassa. Dr. Bourassa is our project lead. He was formerly with the chair of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Florida Atlantic University. Unfortunately, since we've taken on this project, we've lost him to the University of Washington, but he is still involved in this project. In fact, he'll be leading this meeting, a similar meeting on Saturday. And the 4th and final member of our team is Michael Stamm, also of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. So why engage in redistricting? The whole point of redistricting is about fairness. It's about making sure that we honor the principle of one person, one vote. Generally speaking, it's important that districts should be relatively equal in population. Equally populous districts are necessary if voters are to have an equally weighted voice in the election of their representatives. So if we take an example, if you imagine District A and District B, and District A has 1,000 people, and District B has 500 people. That means that the residents of the larger district, District A, has half the influence over its elected representative than the residents of the smaller district. And so that's unjust, that's unfair. And so that's why it's important to engage in the redistricting process so that every district has equal representation. And so what we state is that where practical solutions are available that improve both population balance, spatial compactness, and, very importantly, do so without artificially diluting a minority population, those districts should be adjusted. So the data that we've used in this project is the same data that's used all across the country in all redistricting efforts. That is, it's the U.S. Census Bureau's 2020 Census Redistricting Summary File. Now, specifically, when we do this at the city level, we always use the census's smallest enumeration unit, the smallest geographic area that they use to count people, and that is the census block. And so it's this small unit that gives us the spatial resolution necessary to redistrict at the city level. So each of these blocks will be aggregated together, joined together to create one of the 4 election districts of the city. The other data set that we use in this project was housing data that was provided to us by city staff. And the reason that we do this, of course, is you don't want to go through all the effort and expense of engaging in the redistricting process, only to find that at the end of all of that effort and expense, that your election districts are already out of balance because of migration patterns or because of developments that have occurred in the city. And it's very important to remember that we're already 2.5 years beyond the date of the last census. So we're 1/4 of the way towards the next census. So it makes sense that you would engage in a population projection. So specifically, that population projection is going out to February 2024, which is before your next set of municipal elections. So with that population projection in mind, what we find is that by February 2024, we estimate that the city's population will be 46,177. Now, if we divide that by 4, we get the magic number of 11,544. That's the predicted average population for each district. So to ensure fairness, we need to make sure that when we are drawing your new district boundaries, that each of the 4 districts gets as close to that number as we possibly can make it. Now, of course, it'll be impossible to get exactly on that number, but again, that's the goal. So, using this population projection, using the existing commission district boundaries, we find that District 2 will have a population of 17,166 people. That's 5,622 people more than the projected average. The smallest district, meanwhile, will be District 4, which would have 6,701 people, which would be 4,483 fewer people than the projected average. So, what we're seeing is that your existing districts are heavily imbalanced. That's both using the 2020 data and the 2024 projection. If we look at the 2020 data, we see that your overall deviation, which is the statistics we use to measure how balanced your districts are, is way out of whack. That's a scientific term, way out of whack, 133.31%. And if we project that forward to 2024, we see that this imbalance is becoming even more exacerbated. It grows to 150.21%. If we divide that by 4, that gives us a mean deviation of 37.55%. So your existing districts, while beautiful and very compact and easily recognizable, they don't work in terms of fairness. They don't achieve the population equity that we're seeking. Your spread is another statistic that we use to measure population equity. That's a number that's achieved when we add the deviation of your largest district and the deviation associated with your smallest district is 90.65%. So both of these numbers, your spread value and your mean deviation, far exceed the maximum threshold of 10%. That's the standard value that's used in redistricting across the country. So way above that threshold value. So this tells us that redistricting is absolutely necessary. And from what I understand, actually redistricting has never occurred in this city. So it's not surprising that these numbers are out of whack. The overall pattern of district boundary changes requires increasing the population of districts 3 and 4 while reducing that of districts 1 and 2. This is going to necessitate an adjustment of the geographic boundaries where districts 3 and 4 must expand in size while districts 1 and 2 must contract. Now, of course, it's extremely important to recognize that the only option to increase the size in terms of population and therefore geographic area of districts 3 and 4 is for districts 3 and 4 to move westward. They can't go north, they can't go south, they can't go east. There's only one way they can go, and that's westward. So we were asked to create various map options for both the Commission to consider and also for public input. We were asked specifically to create 3. So far, we've created 4. But as I mentioned before, there's always the potential to create additional alternatives based upon your feedback and based upon the feedback that we get from the Commission. So let's get to the meat of this evening's presentation. Let's get to the 4 alternatives that we've created so far. First, again, let me discuss the methodology that we always use whenever we engage in redistricting for a city. Our first criterion in redistricting is achieving that fairness that we described before, achieving that population equity. So we're looking for reasonable population equity without crashing through that 10% threshold we discussed before. We also seek to adhere to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which states that arbitrary dilution of minority population classes and other discriminatory practices are strictly prohibited. Our second criterion is seeking geographic contiguity and appropriate compactness. So that means that when we draw boundaries, we will seek to follow major natural and man-made boundaries where possible. We will also seek to respect the integrity of communities of interest, and we will strive to minimize the degree of change in pre-existing patterns of districts. Now, of course, in this case, because the districts are so heavily imbalanced, that becomes more of a challenge, but still we strive to achieve this goal. But again, I remind you that first and foremost, the primary responsibility of this effort is to make sure that we achieve fairness for all the residents of your districts. We achieve population equity between the 4 districts. The others remain significant in guiding our decisions, and you'll see that as we talk about the various alternatives, some of those other criterion are emphasized more than others, and I'll discuss that as we go along. So, 4 alternatives have been prepared for your consideration, all meet standard districting guidelines, and again, they're just alternative ways to better balance the district populations. With that said, we had a public meeting with the Commission last week, and it's worth noting that at that meeting, the Commission seemed to indicate a preference out of the 4 for alternatives 2 and 3. They didn't seem particularly fond of alternatives 1 and 4. And I've already gotten some feedback that we're likely to create another alternative. But these are the 4 that we've gotten so far. So this is alternative 4. It's the biggest departure from the city's present 4-quadrant configuration. And in this map, you'll see that the red hatching represents the changes from your existing district boundaries. The north-south border becomes Lucerne Avenue, except where District 4 projects north to 7th Avenue, west of Federal Highway. The east-west border largely remains Dixie Highway, except for where District 3 projects west to North A Street, south of 10th Avenue, and where District 4 projects west to High Ridge Road, south of 12th Avenue South. Here we see a zoom-in of Alternative 1 showing the northern half of the city, and here we see a zoom-in of Alternative 1 looking at the southern half of the city. In this particular alternative, only 3 neighborhoods are split. This was, obviously, it's not a priority for us to concern ourselves with.
You had option 4 on there, and now it says option 1. He meant 1. He meant 1, because it did say option 4 on the slide before. No, it said 1. You just misspoke. You said this was option 4, but you meant 1.
Oh, if I misspoke, I apologize. Yeah, we're talking about alternative 1. Okay, very good. Thank you.
They don't always exactly.
Let me just reiterate. The Commissioner was just stating that when we talk about neighborhoods, it would be more appropriate to describe neighborhood associations rather than neighborhoods. So looking at these neighborhood associations, only 3 are split under Alternative 1. That's the fewest of the 4 alternatives that we've created thus far, and the neighborhoods that are split on neighborhood associations, that are split under this alternative are Tropical Ridge, Parrot Cove, and the residences of Lake Osborne. The overall deviation of alternative 1 is much improved. The total deviation falls all the way down to 7.44%. The mean deviation falls down to 1.86%. And the spread falls down to 4.96%. So both this mean deviation number and the spread value are well below that 10% threshold we described. So at least statistically speaking, this alternative is viable, but of course, if this alternative is rejected by the Commission and the public, that's just fine. So let's move on to alternative 2. Alternative 2, again, we're always trying to achieve population equity, but in this case, we're trying to deviate from the existing district boundaries to the least degree possible. And specifically, we're trying to keep the east-west boundary as straight as we possibly can. So this maintains somewhat that 4-quadrant arrangement of the existing districts, though the 4 districts no longer meet at a common intersection under alternative 2. The north-south border remains Lake Worth Road in this alternative, except where District 1 expands north to the west of 95, south of 7th Avenue. The east-west border between Districts 2 and 3 moves west to the FEC Railway, and between Districts 1 and 4, the east-west boundary moves west to South E Street. Here we see alternative 2 zoomed in on the northern boundary, and here you can see again we've got that nice, clean, perfectly north-south border between Districts 2 and 3, except running along the railway. And it's worth noting when we compare this to the next alternative, this compactness, this nice regular boundary, comes at the expense of some population equity. So we're sacrificing a little bit of population equity under this alternative to get that nice, neat boundary. Here we see alternative 2 zoomed in to the southern half of the city. In this case, we have 8 neighborhood associations being split, and that's the most among the 4 alternatives that we present this evening. Those neighborhoods are Sunset Ridge, Tropical Ridge, Royal Poinciana, Memorial Park, Whispering Palms, Downtown Jewel, Bryant Park, and Commerce Park Village. So if we look at the statistics for alternative 2, we see the total deviation is falling to 11.27%. Your mean deviation is 2.82%, which is the highest of all the alternatives, but again, well below that 10% deviation threshold. And the spread is falling to 8.28%. So again, highest of the 4 alternatives this evening, below the 10% overall deviation threshold. And there was a comment that came up at the last meeting that says, well, if we're only at 8.28%, maybe we don't have as much margin of error than you might like. Well, keep in mind, it's very difficult to predict the future, right? So it could well be that you see a bunch of development in District 3, and that could easily bring those numbers down. So it's not necessarily a good idea to predict too far into the future. What we can do is work with the data that we have. So here we have alternative 3. It's a variant of alternative 2 that creates a more compact and balanced District 1 while leaving District 4 unchanged from the prior alternative. The north-south border again remains Lake Worth Road, except where District 1 expands north to 3rd Avenue east of I-95. To improve population equity between Districts 2 and 3, several jogs are introduced to the east-west border. If we work from north to south, we can say going from Dixie Highway to the FEC Railway south of Worthmore Drive, and then again to East Street south of 7th Avenue North. Between Districts 1 and 4, the east-west boundary moves west to South East Street. Here we see the alternative 3 zoomed in on the northern half of the city, so you can see we have that jog in the east-west boundary now. And so it's not as compact, it's not as clean, but it does give you greater population equity if that is a preference, if that's a desire of the Commission and the public. Okay. And then we see the southern half of the city where, again, we have a nice straight border along East Street between 1 and 4. Under Alternative 3, 7 neighborhood associations split. These are Sunset Ridge, Tropical Ridge, Royal Poinciana, Memorial Park, Whispering Palms, Downtown Jewel, and Bryant Park. So the overall deviation is again much improved under Alternative 3. The total deviation falls to 2.62%. The mean deviation falls to 0.66. This is the lowest deviation of the 4 alternatives. So numerically speaking, quantitatively speaking, we can say that this offers the best population equity of the 4 alternatives that we presented so far. Similarly, the spread falls down to 1.72%, which is again the lowest of the 4 alternatives presented. Finally, we have Alternative 4, and again, it was indicated at the last meeting that this is probably not going to be selected, but I was asked to present it to you anyway. The goal of this is to marry the best aspects of Alternative 1 and 3 together. The north-south border remains Lake Worth Road, except where District 1 expands north to 3rd Avenue North, east of I-95. And to improve population equity between Districts 2 and 3, just as we saw in Alternative 3, several jogs are introduced to the east-west border. Again, working north to south, we're going from Dixie Highway to the FEC Railway again, south of Worthmore Drive. But then we're going over to East Street, this time south of 10th, rather than south of 7th. Between Districts 1 and 4, the east-west boundary moves west to the FEC Railway, and then District 4 projects west to High Ridge Road, south of 12th Avenue South. Here we see Alternative 4 zoomed in to the northern part of the city, and here we see the southern half of the city. Under Alternative 4, just 4 neighborhood associations are split. These are Sunset Ridge, Tropical Ridge, Royal Poinciana, and Memorial Park. The overall deviation is much improved under Alternative 2. The total deviation falls to 7.91%, while the mean deviation falls to 1.98%. And finally, the spread falls to 6.1%. So again, both the mean deviation and the spread are well below that 10% threshold value that we're describing. So to summarize, all of the alternatives dramatically improve population equity. Alternative 1 splits the fewest number of neighborhood associations. Alternative 2 attempts to maintain the existing 4-quadrant configuration. Alternative 3 is the most balanced of the 4 options presented so far. And Alternative 4 attempts to marry the best aspects of Alternatives 1 and Alternative 3 together. Again, all 4 well below that deviation threshold. Some cities, prefer to seek the quantitatively, least amount of deviation possible. Other cities put emphasis on other criteria. As long as we're below that 10% threshold, we're good to go. So here we see the first 2 of the maps together, Alternatives 1 and 2. Sorry, the slide jumped ahead of me. Alternative 1 and 2 side by side, and now Alternatives 3 and 4 side by side. And with that, I am done. I'm sure you're all very relieved. I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Hello, Commissioner Maliga. In the very beginning, you brought up voter database, but in the very beginning, it said votes.
Yeah, but I didn't mention voter database.
Right, so I need you to clarify for the people listening that the voter database, the people who are registered to vote versus votes that was on the screen, can you please explain the differences between, because a lot of people are thinking this is based on voter data.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Excellent question. And I don't just say that because you're a commissioner. So it's an excellent point. The guiding principle is the idea of one person, one vote, which is a catchphrase that describes that when you engage in redistricting, it has to be fair. But it's extremely important to recognize that when we engage in redistricting at the city level or the congressional district level, wherever you're engaging in redistricting around the country, we're not, I repeat, we're not counting voters, we're counting people. And that's all people. It doesn't, in other words, it's very important that everybody has the right to be represented. Whether you're a baby of 1 day old or a person that's 105 years old, whether you're registered to vote or not, doesn't matter. It's all about the people, the residents of the city of Lake Worth Beach, not who's registered to vote in the city of Lake Worth Beach.
To follow on that, I assume that the basis of basing it on residents, on people rather than voters, is based in the federal law. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. This is established law. This is all about representation. Representation is not limited to people who have the right to vote. Everybody deserves to be represented.
Any more commissioners? Okay. So I have a couple of questions. One is then, if you're basing this on census and not on actual voters, then you're implying a certain amount of unfairness, because now, truly a baby isn't really a voter. And so, it would seem to me as a statistician, which I assume that you have statisticians there, that would be more equitable if you based it on, the eligible voting population.
Yeah, that's. Thank you for the question. That's a misconception. Again, everybody deserves representation. If a baby is being living in a cancer hotspot because they live next to a nuclear power plant, for example, the fact that they're not a voter does not diminish their need for them to be able to go to their representative and say, "Dang it, this is wrong. I have rights. We need to fix this issue." So again, it's not about voters, it's about people. And that's the standard all across the land.
The second question was the assumption that you would just consider 4 districts? Did you look at any alternatives that would add a 5th district or anything like that, or was that not considered?
No, we were not asked to consider additional districts. If the city had asked us to look at the options for 5 or 6 or 7 districts, then we certainly could have. That said, it's not a very big city in terms of population, and so 4 districts seems eminently feasible, appropriate.
Okay, you indicated that you based all of this on census data and you were working at the block level, correct?
Census data and housing data provided to us by city staff.
Right, right. Okay, so you've provided no granularity on any of these maps. Do you have any maps to show the distribution of population, density?
No, that's not necessary. The census data is readily available. It's all online, and so if you were so inclined to go out and look at density, you certainly could. Density plays a very important role when we do start drawing the boundaries. Obviously, if you are moving a border across a highly dense neighborhood, that's going to require a smaller geographic adjustment. In this case, when we look at the density in the east-west border, we're often looking at relatively low density areas, and so we do find that the geographic adjustments necessary are larger.
But if you do look at the census data, even at the tract level, you'll see, if you're looking, and I think Drew was kind of alluding to this, you actually see that there are a very high density of people below the age of 18 in districts 1 and 2. And it's not clear to me that if you try to start adjusting, you're going to actually be able to get voters. You're going to have a district with the same number of voters in each one, but you're going to have them elected by 125 instead of 1,000 people, voters.
Yeah, thank you. So again, we're not looking at voting data. We're not concerning ourselves only with people who are of voting age. We're looking at the residents of the city, regardless of their age.
But they can't provide you any input. I mean, they're not providing any input to the process.
I mean, there's a whole number of factors that we can't account for. The goal here is to create 4 districts that are as close to 11,500 people as we possibly can make it. And again, their voting status, their age is completely irrelevant. The density of the various regions of the neighborhood is going to drive the size of the 4 districts, but we're just trying to get to that 11,500 number for the 4 districts. That's it.
But it also drives where you want to put the lines, because if you're going to have all your population growth over here on the far west side, which is what it looks is happening, then you're going to be actually creating more problems down the road if you don't account for it up front.
So again, we can only create the redistricts, create your new districts for the population data we have. It's impossible to, I'm not a clairvoyant, don't have supernatural powers, can't predict the future accurately, right? We can only work with the data we have. It's going to be incumbent upon the city not only to redistrict in this particular cycle, but probably what we would recommend is that you amend the charter such that at a minimum you engage in this redistricting process after each decennial census. Some cities handle this differently. A lot of cities will have language in their city charter that says after the decennial census you will engage in the redistricting process, and if the districts are found to be out of balance, you will move the boundaries. If they're not found to be out of balance, then you can leave the boundaries as is. And that's certainly been the case that we've experienced as we've done some of our projects. Other cities are more aggressive. They state that after the decennial census, or in the case where you have a large development that comes in and throws the population equity out of whack, at that time immediately you should engage in the redistricting process. So it's impossible for us to create districts that are going to be foolproof throughout the future, right? You're going to have to engage in this process again and again and again.
Excuse me. Yes, so when the census came through, the census wasn't right. You see what I'm saying?
I understand.
So why would you go and you study trying to change the district? If the census is not right, then something's wrong. So let's back up and look at the picture.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. This is an issue that's certainly come up when we've done these projects before. There's, I'm not saying this is the case in your particular case, but sometimes people are distrustful of government. Some people are naturally worried about the census that just occurred in 2020 because it occurred in the middle of a pandemic. True. And so, that's something we discussed in our report, that the 2020 census was presented with a number of challenges, and one of those issues was the idea that it was conducted in the pandemic, and that might lead to error. Now, what the census has told us is that in any given census, you'd expect to have a certain amount of error, a certain amount of uncertainty. But what they've told us is in the 2020 census, there was certainly valid concern that the 2020 census might be less accurate than typical census. What they've discovered, reportedly, after the fact, is that while there was a lower response rate in general in the 2020 census compared to typical census years, it wasn't nearly as bad as they thought it was going to be. And so while there's certainly going to be some error in the census, it's thought to be much better than was thought. And what remains true is that the census will always be, while not perfect, the best possible count of the population of the United States of America and its various regions than anything else you could do. So the only other alternative is for the city to hire its own demographers to go in and create its own census for the city, which would be inordinately expensive and prohibitive, and at the end of all of that, probably not more accurate than the census, the 2020 census.
Again, it seems, Commissioner McVoy, it seems like we're getting distracted a little bit with procedural things. Again, as far as I understand, federal law says how you have to do this. Your source of information is the U.S. Census, the most recent one. You're allowed to make adjustments if you have some reasonable prediction a few years out, which we did based on developments that are either being built or projected. And you have to do it on number of people, not on voters.
Correct.
So these are not things that we have any choice over, or we can have all the opinions we like on it, but they're not relevant because the procedure is fixed by forces outside of us. That's my understanding, and correct me, please, if wrong.
Not at all. I won't correct you. Again, you may have objections to the census, but good luck finding anything better. So, in the past, when South Florida was going, through its population boom, some of the cities that myself and certainly my mentor in this process, Dr. Schultz, when he was doing this for cities throughout South Florida, those cities were growing so fast that they had to engage in this redistricting effort every 1 year, every 2 years. And so in that situation, it would very quickly become the case that the census would become obsolete because the cities were just growing so fast. And so in those cases, yeah, those cities did have to basically do their own census of the population between the decennial censuses. But you're absolutely right. This is as good as the data is going to possibly get without vast expense on the city's part.
Yeah, I'm just curious. What is the statistical variance that the the Census Bureau uses for addressing what came out of the pandemic when they were trying to collect data? And did you use any of that statistical variance in adjusting your data when you came up with your population distribution?
No, I couldn't tell you what that number is off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I don't know. But it wouldn't be appropriate for us to adjust it, right? The census is already used inferential statistics to make all the adjustments that they need. And so for us to go in after the fact and start fudging those numbers would be completely inappropriate and would certainly, if this redistricting effort was challenged in the court of law, would certainly land us and the city in very hot water. So no, not appropriate to start fudging census numbers. We have to use the numbers that they provide us.
Would you say that option 2 is more aesthetic as opposed to options 1 and 3 that have addressed the issue of, bringing more equity and representation to the city out of the 4 options?
Right. So as we stated, option 2 was really created to try to maintain as much as we possibly could, the present configuration, right? So you really does have those 4 quadrant configuration. Whether or not it's more aesthetic, that's a subjective opinion. That would, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I can tell you personally, I don't have a favorite, and this is always true for the alternatives that we create when we engage in the redistricting process. They're like my children. None of them are my favorite. And again, remember, based upon the feedback that we get this evening on Saturday and the feedback that we get from the Commission, there's, in all likelihood, we're going to have at least one more option available for you.
I'm just to follow up with your answer, but you said in the beginning of your presentation, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the purpose of redistricting, like the main purpose is to, make it better representation in the city, right? And so as comparing 2 to 1 and 3, would you say that 1 and 3 addresses that way, substantially more than 2?
So again, as we discussed, right, we can, let me go back to that slide, so we can talk about this, right? So you can see here, right, that the mean deviation of alternative 3, that 0.66 number, that tells us that quantitatively speaking, alternative 3 is the most equitable, right? And so if you wanted to go purely using numbers, and if we were to assume for a moment that we were only able to choose from these 4 alternatives, then alternative 3 would be the logical choice under that scenario. But I would caution you that that's not the legal standard. The legal standard is that your deviation, either your spread or your mean deviation, fall below that 10% threshold. So once we're below that magic number, once below that 10%, you can apply any standard you like to choose between the favorite amongst the options.
all four alternatives that you brought meet that criteria of reducing the variability below 10%.
Absolutely.
Now, if you wanted to get more particular, say, well, which drove it down the furthest, I think you meant to say alternative 3 drives it small. Is that correct?
I believe I said that. Yeah, alternative 3.
Yeah. But any of them will do.
Any of them are acceptable, quantifiably speaking, yeah.
Again, it's Commissioner Maliga representing District 1, and there are many people in the room from District 1. And you heard loud and clear from the dais from me that the perception that the African American community starts at 12th Avenue is incorrect. And it's very important that above all of these numbers that the African American community is kept together. And all of these either show separation between 12th Avenue South or Wingfield, also known as the wall that literally separated the blacks from the whites. So when you reference an option 5, I know that you've heard loud and clear the concern. And again, that's federal law, number 1. But number 2, it's about keeping the integrity of our community together. And I just want you to address that, because I know that you keep saying that there will be another map coming forward. So I just want the public to know why you're saying those words.
Let me push back just a little bit, right? So it was always intended that we were going to have these meetings with not only the Commission and the public. And it was always the idea that we would get feedback from both parties, and based upon that feedback, either, unless the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, the idea was always that we would incorporate that feedback and either make a deviation or an alteration, a tweak to one of the 4 alternatives, or create a 5th alternative, or even a 6th or a 7th if necessary. Hopefully that doesn't become the case. The only pushback I want to give is what's required under federal law. So the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which we obviously take very carefully, states that in no redistricting process should there be arbitrary or malicious breakup of minority communities. What we've done here is address the idea that, District 4 and District 3 are way too small. And so what we've tried to do in the 4 alternatives, I'll show you some of the options, some of the ways that you could grow option 4. And so Florida Atlantic University does not engage in gerrymandering. We would never maliciously break up a community. And so we would obviously definitively state that we have not violated Florida law or the United States law. So if we're creating a new alternative, it's not because we believe we have broken the law. But we are very keen to take your feedback, to take the Commission's feedback, and create new options.
Okay, you were saying there might be an option 5. Mm-hmm. Where are you going to get option 5 from? Because we as District 1 feel, and we expressed that to our commissioner on Monday night, I think it was, that we feel that you are breaking the law. We feel that you're squeezing our district, our community out. And looking at these 4 maps that we have looked at, that's what you have done. They've taken away our community in District 1 and gave it away. And we feel that there's something lawfully or mischievously done. And I know I'm not going to stand for it, and that's why we're here tonight. And we have some input on option 5, or some tweaking that we want to let you all know, that we're bringing it forward, and we took it to our commissioner, that we want to have input on tweaking district, the way you have taken it and divided it away from it. And neither one of these is good. There's tweaking need to be done in District 1 for our community.
Very good. Thank you. So I'm very glad you're here, and I recognize your strong feelings in this, and I welcome those feelings. Again, the goal is to get your feedback. Commissioner Malega had mentioned that some members of the community want to provide a suggested alternative. We're very happy to take a look at that and look at those numbers. And if the map that's presented to us works such that it achieves the population equity, we're happy to make that alternative 5. If it doesn't work, we'll tweak it and so that the numbers do work and try to create an alternative 5 that's as close to that as possible. So, believe me, I hear you, I understand your concerns. I promise you, you don't know me, so I know it's a lot for you for me to ask you to trust me, but I promise you that nothing malicious has been done here. We are only looking at the numbers and trying to find our way that we can get to 11,500 people for both District 4 and District 1 and District 2. We are more than happy to create an alternative that the residents of the city of Lake Worth Beach will be happy with, and nobody will feel that they've been, carved out or gerrymandered or any of those horrible words. We're not interested in that at all. No? I understand. I get it. I completely get it. Redistricting has a bad reputation, and that bad reputation is earned. But I am here I'm here as a member of an impartial body. I'm here as a member of Florida Atlantic University. Our job is to provide insulation between the city staff and the residents, right? You don't ever want a situation where a member of the city, whether it be an elected official or someone who's working under that elected official, has had the appearance that they've had the thumb put down on them and had undue pressure exerted towards them. I'm here to hear your feedback. I've heard your feedback. We've heard your feedback. We're going to create an alternative that hopefully the majority of the population of the city of Lake Worth Beach can be happy with.
Sir, Mr. Marcus will speak, then you.
I just have an opinion, and it's that, because we're now going to be electing our commissioners only in districts, so in other words, the voters in that district are going to be responsible for that commissioner, the way the districts are set up is going to become more important because of that limitation. So I'm not going to get representation from 4 commissioners anymore, only 1 commissioner. So how it's set up? Okay. Well, I appreciate that. But I think from a voting standpoint, I do think this makes it more important. So that's just an opinion. And, I wish everybody good luck. I think it is important to give, priority to the concerns that Retha mentioned.
No, what we were speaking on a few minutes ago. You're saying your feet, you're being pushed, this and that. I feel like... I'm saying I'm not being pushed. I'm saying if this effort was, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if this effort was being engaged rather than by an independent party, myself and my team, but by a member of the staff, they might feel that undue pressure. I'm saying because we're independent and we're from Florida Atlantic University, we feel isolated from that pressure. Right, but we're feeling the pressure, If it's not broke, why try to come in and fix something? Leave it alone. Leave it as it is.
Well, I think we've established that it is broke. Right, that the districts aren't fair in terms of population equity. The districts are heavily imbalanced. It's not fair. It's not fair that the residents...
So what is your solution?
Well, we've presented our solutions, right? It's not fair that the residents of District 3 and 4, which are the smallest districts, it's not fair that they get twice the representation at the commission than the residents of District 1 and 2. If you're in District 1 right now, you are underrepresented. And so...
He's a professional.
Yeah. That's not to say Commissioner Malega doesn't do an excellent job. She's a strong advocate, but still, she represents twice the people that the Commissioner for District 4 does. That's not fair. And so the only way to make it fair is such that each of the 4 districts have close to equal population. And so there's lots and lots of ways that we can carve up the pie. And we are very keen to come up with a solution that obviously you can never please all the people all the time, but we can certainly strive to create a solution that the majority of the residents of the city of Lake Worth Beach would be happy with.
Yeah, Sam Goodstein. I live south of 12th, and the preservation of the historic black community there as a unit is a high priority. I also see the absolute need. This is something which my friend and I were on the, now wish we had looked at it when on the charter review. We had the perfect chance, but 10 years from now they'll have another chance. But what I look at is I would have liked to see a few other creative things tried. Did you do any projections about just doing horizontal strips of the city? Or do you have any?
No, we did not create an alternative that broke up the city into 4 horizontal strips. It's certainly, again, one of the goals, and there's a legal precedent for this, is to not completely blow up existing districts, right? Which is what you're describing, right? If we went to a north-south approach, that would be a complete revolution of the district boundaries. It would also have the effect that most likely each of the 4 commissioners would be redistricted off the commission. That said, if we were asked to create a proposal like that, we certainly could, but no, we didn't look at that alternative.
Okay, and one of the real point that I wanted to make was that you have as a priority the split neighborhoods.
No,
but neighborhood associations. Right.
That's not my priority at all. Neighborhoods and neighborhood associations, especially when you're dealing with a relatively small city, do not make good building blocks for redistricting. At the first public meeting that we had with the Commission, the idea that any alternatives should try to avoid splitting neighborhood associations was raised. And so we were very conscious of that, and so we reported how many neighborhood associations were split under the alternatives that were created. But again, the criterion that we were looking to achieve was to achieve population equity, maintain spatial compactness, maintain respect for the integrity of for communities of interest. And so, yeah, we're reporting how many neighborhood associations are split, but
okay, that's just something you're reporting on.
Correct.
I got it, because the important point here is that the neighborhood associations don't really correspond to any historic neighborhood, or if they do, it's on a pretty chance basis in town. They evolved in a historical sense of the people in different areas getting together. They don't really reflect in most cases the neighborhood or anything about the actual community. Mm-hmm. So when you look at communities of interest, the thing that we're discussing in District 1 with South of 12th Avenue is a community of interest, as opposed to, you will hear it spoken of as Whispering Palms, neighborhood association sometimes, but it is not. It is the historic community of interest that is being advocated for by people who may speak about Whispering Palms. And I wanted to make that point.
Indeed. I think it's an excellent point, and we've heard that feedback, and so the next alternative that we create will certainly look to maintain that area as a single whole.
He has a mic. Go ahead.
Okay. As I understood it, and correct me if I'm wrong, from one of the early meetings that you had with the City Commission, that y'all have done similar redistricting exercises in municipalities throughout the state.
In my case, I've engaged in redistricting in both Palm Beach counties and Broward counties. Some of my teammates have engaged in redistricting efforts across the state. That's true.
Well, I guess my real question is, what kind of lessons learned have y'all been able to apply to, I don't want to say our unique configuration, because I think everyone thinks they have a unique configuration, but how have we been able to benefit from what you've learned from these other municipalities, these other, jurisdictions, so that some of the headaches that we're suddenly running into could have been avoided?
I think what I would say to that is this is it's perfectly natural for you all to have an emotional response to this. And you're right to. What I would suggest is that you have to trust that based upon our years of experience, and the only way that you're going to be able to trust us is that we prove it to you, that we will listen to your feedback, take that into consideration, and create a new alternative. You say that you experienced heartache. Could that be avoided? I don't know that it can be avoided. I think what I've learned in all of the redistricting efforts that I've engaged in is that there's always heartache. There's always someone who's upset by the position of a district boundary. It's literally impossible to please all of the people all of the time. We will strive to please as many people as we possibly can, but again, our main goal is achieving that fairness, achieving that population equity component. And based upon that feedback we're hearing this evening, we're going to create a new alternative that tries to address your concerns. And that's how we're going to prove it to you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have one question. Robert Gordon.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you.
We have one more meeting, right? Two more meetings. When is the final decision going to be made? When is it going to actually, we're going to come together and the decision going to be made about it? How long?
So, that's an ultimate decision for your decision makers, your commission, right? We were asked to create a report and present alternatives to you. We're going to do that. I don't make the final decision, right? We just present options, and then your commission makes the final decision. There's going to be a first reading coming up, and then after that a second reading. It'll be at the second reading where the final decision is made. But before we have the first reading, we will be submitting an amendment to our report where we include at least one new alternative. That will be posted online. All our report, our PowerPoints, all of our maps have been posted on the city website. Our addendum will be posted on the city website. The new alternative will be posted on the city website. And of course, you'll all be welcome to come to that public meeting with your commission to give feedback and express your concerns. And I know you guys have got a great commission. I'm not saying that to kiss, but I've had a lot of experience with commissions. There's a real strong sense of community in this city. I haven't always witnessed that. I've experienced a lot of hostility at various commissions. That's not what I've witnessed so far in my meetings. I always feel very welcome here. So you'll have the opportunity to address your commission at both of those meetings before they make a final decision. And as to the exact date, Melissa, do you remember the date of the first and second reading?
No, we're not sure, but...
To be determined.
Yes, it will be well posted. And it will be this year, right? Probably. The first reading, at least. It should be. It should be, but I'm not committing to anything.
Well, let me say, it really depends on the process of creating the alternative map, and then also receiving input, a presentation and input for that map, and who knows what comes out of that meeting. So we really can't give a concrete date. We had proposed that if all goes according to the meetings that we have already scheduled, it will be possibly the end of the year. But we can't really commit to that. It really depends on the alternative map, review of that, and then where we go from there.
Yeah, because we certainly want to do this right and do not want to rush into anything. Okay, so we have to submit the information to the supervisor of elections by next September 2023.
So that's almost a year. We plan to do it well before that, but we want to get it right.
Right, and that's why we started so soon. It gives us a whole lot of time to talk, flush out the alternatives, and hear your input so that we wouldn't have to rush this process through. So we have plenty of time.
Yeah, communities of interest. As an advocate for one of them, did you identify communities of interest in the city? And if so, did the commission look at different communities that may or may not be represented here or during the process and have an effort to reach out to them? I guess that's a four-part question.
So the only communities of interest that were specifically looked at were, firstly, the existing districts, right? So what we wouldn't want to do, for example, is if there was an existing district that was a minority-majority district, for example, we would want to make sure that at the end of the redistricting process that it remained a minority-majority district. So that was one example of a community of interest, okay? In this case, all of the 4 districts are, very diverse in their demographics. The other communities of interest that, we concerned ourselves are the neighborhood associations that we mentioned. So where possible, we would strive not to break up those neighborhood associations. But in this particular case, what we've seen in all 4 of the alternatives is that it's not possible, or at least highly unlikely, that you could create an alternative where none of the neighborhood associations are broken up. Beyond that, it's very important that we approach this process from a 30,000-foot level, where we strive to create districts only looking at population numbers. If we start the process by looking at the cities and saying, oh, there's a majority Latino community, oh, there's a majority African American community, and then we drew a line through that, then we would rightly be accused of engaging in discrimination, right? So we don't do that. We start the process in this initial round by taking that, higher level, just trying to create equity among the communities, and then we get feedback. And we've gotten extremely valuable feedback from both the Commission and yourselves and other members of the community, where you've raised valid objections to the alternatives that we've created so far. And so we're going to go back to the drawing table and create you at least one new alternative.
What I'm wondering, as a sort of procedural thing, certainly we have a lot of folks here from the current District 1, and there's a concern as to, how that seems to be the primary area of concern. I'm not hearing a lot of concern about how 2 and 3 were split. What I did hear at the Commission meeting is clearly alternatives 1 and 4 that have the extension of the new District 4 going out 12th Avenue, that split, I don't think anybody's very comfortable with that. So that takes 1 and 4 off the table. What I'm sensing is that the other concern relates a lot to, and this does get at the issue that you raised. Well, I think what a number of people would like is, well, we want you to draw the community of concern on the map and then try to work around that. And you're saying, well, that's tricky, because if you do that, you open yourself up that the process, is deliberately doing that. But before we go how to address that, what I'm wondering is procedurally, while we're all here, if we agree that 1 and 4 are kind of out because of the 12th Avenue split, then the remaining concern seems to be a north-south one relating mostly to Wingfield Avenue, if I understand right. And the issue there, I think, that might be useful for us to look at while we're all here is, as the process works, 4 has to expand somehow in order to pick up population, and 1 has to be diminished somehow to lose population in order to achieve the balance of population. There's no way around that. The exact shape that you do it is up to, us to, you could wiggle it around some fashion. That kind of goes against the idea of keeping them somewhat like they were before and somewhat contiguous, but you could do that. You might open up to the concern of, well, that's deliberate. So what I'm wondering is, would it be useful to you and to our group to maybe gather around 2 and 3 and talk about, what people might be, and you could consider, well, that might be a possibility, might not. I don't know if that's useful, but that's a thought.
Well, I know I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know that there are community members in District 1 who have put pen to paper, and I think they're going to present it Saturday, if that's correct, to you. And again, it's all about the numbers, right? Like, here's their idea, but you need to look at the population. And I know that some people may not agree with this, but people in my community in Royal Poinciana have even said, we'd hate to lose you, but they're willing to sacrifice me, and I'm willing to be sacrificed, and go from 4th Avenue south past Lake and Lucerne. So I said, just instead of cutting the south, cut the north. And go from A Street up to Lake, Dixie Highway, and 4th Avenue, and see if that helps with the population. And so we've been very versatile, but I do know, Commissioner McVoy, that there is a map that the district has been working on, the community members, and I believe that Ms. Rita said that they're going to present it to you on Saturday, and then maybe you could run the numbers and see if that's a viable opportunity.
Yeah, we would be happy to do that. I would also, obviously there's a great deal of heartburn around alternatives 1 and 4. It might make residents of the city a little bit more comfortable if they knew that those 2 options had been formally withdrawn. And of course, the only way that we can formally withdraw that is to have I can't do that, we can't do that. That would have to be done as a vote by the commission to say, okay, let's formally vote to remove alternatives 1 and 4 from the redistricting.
Technically, we could offer an opinion, but if we did that, it would be a sunshine violation. So while we might... While we, the 2 of us that are here as elected officials might be quite willing to say 1 and 4 off the table or not or whatever, if we formally said that now, I believe that would be a sunshine violation. So while we would like to, be helpful, I don't think we can.
The other response I would have to that is, of course, if we look at this map, folks, if we look at this map, what we're describing, of course, is that on the southern portion of District 1, what's being proposed is to move that boundary back to the east as far as Wingfield, okay? Now, what that's going to necessitate is that the boundary of District 1/4 is going to have to move further westward in the north. And we will certainly do that. We will certainly create an alternative that looks like that. So the alternative you're describing a swap, right? To keep that 11,500 number, right? The boundary is going to have to jog eastward in the south and jog westward in the north.
And would the split likely be somewhere around 6 or?
The split is going to depend.
Numbers.
The split is going to depend on the numbers.
So it would.
Now, we will certainly continue to talk with the staff of the city and identify, what might be a preferred road along which we would split that. Now, traditionally, we would seek to split it along a major road. So 6th Avenue South would be the logical first option to look at if we go by major roads. But if upon further discussion with staff, they say, oh no, Commissioner Malek was suggesting that 4th be used. And so we could certainly look at that too. But again, that's the type of adjustment that's going to have to be made to make sure we stay around that 11,500 number. Yeah.
I genuinely don't mean any disrespect when I ask this question, but how does the minority community have less representation when they have influence on these alternatives in 1 and 4 as just opposed to 1? Where does the minority community lose representation? They gain it. You know what I mean? They limited the minority communities by dividing it right up and down Dixie. Always one. With the voting for any commissioner, the 3 and 4, half the population of 1 and 2 also has a vote in 2 and 1. Being protected by single-member district voting, how can the minority populations lose representation if now they have influence in 1, where we know there's not like an increase in Caucasian Americans, but now has representation and influence in 4, where is the most affluent, one of the 2 most affluent districts in our city? I really believe that. I know it looks like you lose terrain, but you gain influence, or more, you expand your influence into the 4th district. And I really do not mean any disrespect by that to whoever would like to answer that question.
I'm sorry. I don't want to give you the impression that I'm not responding to you. It was more. No, you make an interesting point, but I believe there was a statement, not a question, right? So, was there a question there?
Okay. I mean, in your professional opinion, I don't know if you studied the history of the city and compared to other cities. How does this move? Does this move, in your professional opinion? You don't live here, you don't know the people here, right? But just professionally speaking, do you believe that if District 1 is made up of minorities, do they lose representation in a single-member district voting, procedure? Do they lose influence in any of these alternatives, do they gain by any chance?
Okay, it's an excellent question, and that's a question that I can answer, right? So again, sometimes when governmental agencies undergo a redistricting process, they'll specifically try to create a minority-majority district, right? Where the goal is to, and this term will sound offensive, but it's the terms that's used in redistricting, okay? So when districts are being created, and when they're being created for political advantage for people, the 2 terms that are used are both cracking and packing. If you're packing, you're trying to take a particular demographic and pack that demographic into one electoral district. Now, there could be advantages and disadvantages from that, right? So an advantage that could be, and I know this was done in the case of Palm Beach County in this last redistricting effort, where there was a particular effort to create a district where the Hispanic community would become the majority community in that district. And in so doing, the goal is to put a person of Hispanic ethnicity on to the county commission. That's the goal. And so that could be thought of as a good thing. But to your point, the counter argument is, well, now all of a sudden the Hispanic community has less influence in all the other districts. And so while they may have a representation on their commission, their influence may be diminished. Okay? So some political parties, when they're engaging in political gerrymandering, again, we don't engage in gerrymandering, but if you were to engage in gerrymandering, you might, let's just, instead of talking about Republicans, Democrats, let's talk about Greens and Yellows, right? You might try to put all the Green Party folks in one district, and that way it would guarantee that the Yellow Party would have control of all the other districts. And therefore, they'd have all the power over the levers of that governmental agency. So that's where the packing and cracking can be used to a disadvantage of a minority, even though they're gaining representation at the governmental agency. Now, in this case, the demographics of District 1 under the existing maps, the black or African American community accounts for 25.11% of the population of District 1. Existing. That's the 2020 data. We have no way of projecting that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Excellent point.
That's referring to the current.
The existing districts, right? So under the alternatives that we've proposed so far, using the 2020 data only, District 1 would have 21.87% representation in District 1, okay? But their representation of the African American community would grow in District 2, to your point, right? So it would go from 19.56% under the existing districts to a quarter of the makeup of District 2. If we look at Alternative 2, we have 23%, 23.66% and 18% respectively, 21% and 20% respectively under Alternative 3, and Alternative 4 is 22 and 21%. So we're not seeing a drastic drop in the makeup of the African American community under District 1 under any of the alternatives. But we are seeing under a couple of them the proportion of the African American community or the influence of the African American community being increased in District 2 under some of these alternatives. So if that answers your question.
I have several questions. I know the mayor mentioned doing a map with horizontal cuts across the city in a recent meeting, probably August or September, and would like to see that option when you all presented your initial report about how imbalanced it was, and then you were going to move on to maps. I know the mayor did reference that, but nothing was done because you were going by the 100-year-old boundaries that were set when the city was chartered, which was the 1, 2, 3, and 4, the horizontal cuts and vertical cuts. Did you meet individually with each of the commissioners to get their individual comments about how to try and rearrange maps or devise new maps? Or did you just meet in an open meeting with the commission?
You said you had multiple questions. Any more?
Well, that leads into, were you told, if you did meet with individual commissioners, did anyone tell you of the history of the city?
Okay, very good. So I can tell you that we have not met with any of the commissioners individually. The only discussions we've had with the commissioners have been in a public setting at the meetings that I believe you've attended, all three of them at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So we've had no feedback on a one-on-one basis from any of the commissioners. Everything's been discussed in public. I can tell you that under the various redistricting projects that we've done, different cities handle it differently. It would certainly be appropriate, and we have done in the past, to have those one-on-one meetings, and then we would report what we heard back from the commissioners to the public in our report. But that was not done in this particular case. To go to your first question, I can honestly tell you I don't recall the mayor mentioning horizontal strips. Okay, maybe that was mentioned and I didn't catch it, or didn't recall it, but I don't recall that. If the city asked us to create such an alternative, we could certainly do so.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good. Folks, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you coming out. I want to assure you we have heard you. We will take your feedback into consideration. You're not going to see that feedback enacted on before the Saturday meeting, but it will certainly be enacted on before any decision is made by your city commission. Thank you, folks.
Also, just want to remind you, our next meeting will be Saturday at 10 a.m. Am I correct? Make sure. Okay. 10 a.m. At South Grade Elementary School. So hope to see you there. You're welcome to come and attend that meeting as well.
All right. Good night, everybody.
And thank you to Mr. Gammack-Clark.